on TV, online and on your smartphone. This is Ticker News.
This episode of Talk Your Book is proudly brought to you by Honan, providing a complete range of insurance, risk and financial solutions.
Fundies called me up, told me to take a look, but stay stubborn as bulls and talk their own book. Get the money, get the money, get the money.
Hi, I'm Chris Judd and this is Talk Your Book, and today we're lucky to be joined for the first time by Andrew Brown from East 72. Andrew, thanks very much for taking the time to have a chat.
Not a problem, Chris. Looking forward to it.
Now, before you get into your stock pick, I thought it'd be good for us to just learn a little bit more about East 72 and how you guys look to invest.
Absolutely. We run something called the East 72 Dynasty Trust. And the reason it's called Dynasty Trust is we invest only in companies that have a controlling shareholder. Most of those controlling shareholders are families. The reason we do that is that we found over time that those companies tend to outperform the wider market. They do so because they have fantastic discipline. They don't usually make poor acquisitions. A lot of managerially run companies, make acquisitions for reasons the management think are strategic and turn out not to be. They're usually very good capital managers. We've got some companies in our portfolio, one in Canada, EL Financial. It has less shares on issue than it did in 1971. We have another company in Belgium called D'Ieteren, where we cannot find the last time they actually issued any new equity capital. And of course, the reason they do that is the families want to retain a controlling shareholding. And obviously, if they issue lots of shares, they can't do that. So we've done a lot of studies on this. In particular, we've used studies in the Canadian market of all places. The reason why is about 16% of the stock market index in Canada, the S&P composite in Canada, is made up of family-controlled companies. So companies like Alimentation Couche-Tard, they're the guys that are making the offer to buy Japan's 7-Eleven holdings, London Mining, Rogers, and companies like that. So they've been very successful. And we tend to find that when we sort of look down into markets around the world, and particularly in Europe, where you've got holding companies in Europe where they do use strong capital management, then these companies do outperform. And so we focus our attention on these kind of companies.
And do you think it's more really just about long-term thinking? Do you think that's the biggest difference between the capital allocation strategies of families or founders compared to a managerial class of management?
Absolutely, Chris. That's spot on. And what it also does, don't forget, is it inculcates that thinking onto you, the investment manager. Because clearly, many of these companies, because they've got long-term strategies, they're building up businesses over 10, 20, 30 years. And some of the companies we own were actually created, D'Ieteren was actually formed in 1807. What it does is it forces you to become a long-term thinker as well. And so you're aligning yourself, in effect, with the management of each of these companies in a way that's a little bit more difficult if you've got a company that's making acquisitions all the time and this, that and the other. And what we found is it's been really good for our discipline in our investment process as well as obviously returns. And
what stock did you want to speak about today?
Today we're going to speak about the stock, which actually has 14 controlled public companies in its orbit. We own 4 of them, and it's been our biggest, or those 4 combined have been our biggest holding for quite some time. They make up about 13% of our portfolio. And the stock is based in France, and it's called Bolloré, B-O-L-L-O-R-E, and it's named after the family who founded that company 202 years ago, but it's had a bit of a story since then.
So yes, maybe start with that. Maybe start with the overview of what they do, and then some of that history, because it is an interesting story.
It is. The overview of what they do is basically they have taken positions in a number of different businesses and built them up and then sold them. The foundation of the company is in Brittany, which is why the company that controls it is called Compagnie de l'Odet, O-D-E-T, and you'll know if you've been to Brittany, there's the Odet River. The company started out basically making fine papers, in other words, things like tobacco papers and stuff like that. It sort of morphed from there, but the family lost control of it in the 19th century, and the control was actually bought by Edmond de Rothschild. Vincent Bolloré, who's very much the patriarch, bought the company back from Edmond de Rothschild in 1981 for 1 French franc. Had a lot of debt in it, and that's why he got it for 1 French franc. And what Vincent Bolloré did was basically turn the company into his kind of private holding company. He is a consummate stock market raider. Bolloré made €2.5 billion on 5 stock market raids in the 1990s. The most famous of which, not the most lucrative, was actually raiding Lazard, the investment bank. What Bolloré did was build up into transportation and logistics, both in Africa and in Europe. But then, over 2022 and 2023, Bolloré sold both of those businesses for a combined €11 billion, which is why at the present day, Chris, it has about €6 billion in cash. So you can imagine it's pretty dangerous. One of the things they've been brilliant at is capital management. And in 2021, they had control of 30% of Vivendi. At the time, Vivendi owned Universal Music Group, which is the world's largest owner of recorded music. And when I say owner, by and large, they own the master cuts of the tracks. So if you hear a Rolling Stones track on the radio, it's actually owned not by the Rolling Stones, but it's owned by UMG. And UMG obviously pay the Stones a royalty for it being played on the radio, but they obviously control all the music of the Stones, the Beatles, U2, just about anybody you've ever heard of. They are the distributor, and I do stress that, for Taylor Swift. So they do make money from Tay-Tay, but she obviously owns all the master cuts. These guys own a third.
In terms of Universal, I guess there's a big pile of cash and then 3 distinct business units, but Universal being the most important of those 3 holding assets that they own. Talk to me about how that landscape's changed since streaming's come into play, and maybe the interrelationship between Universal and Spotify and what that looks like.
Absolutely. To be blunt, until streaming came along, music was in the doldrums. It was going nowhere. And once Spotify really started to take off, and it was Spotify rather than Apple, okay? So once Spotify started to take off, because it replaced all those illegal music streaming apps that were around at the time, then what you've seen is since then, effectively, the market for recorded music has more than trebled. And it's simply because of Spotify and any of the other of the legal streamers. And there's a symbiotic relationship between, say, Spotify and Universal Music Group and its 2 main competitors, who are Warner Music and Sony, because they can't do without each other. Okay, a lot of people try to create a theory that, one will surpass the other. They won't. Universal can't do without Spotify as its distribution, if you will. Spotify can't do without the content. And so the market's trebled. And so Universal Music Group, which was then in Vivendi, it was spun out, and it's got basically 60% owned by 4 different owners. But once it's been spun out, it's really started to grow aggressively. That was shown in the market pricing of it until very, very recently.
And what happened? They got clipped a bit in their most recent quarterly. What was it about that the market didn't like?
They got clipped a little bit, Chris. That's very kind of you to call it clipping. 25% in one day is a fair clip. What happened is that there are various other people that license the music. So that there was a bit of a fight last year between TikTok and UMG, and UMG pulled all the music from TikTok. They've since gone back. Meta are not particularly interested in paying the price, and so Meta's streaming of UMG music had gone down significantly. and there was less of a growth within the Spotify part of things as well. And so the growth rate sort of ticked down to about 8% per annum from 13. And so the market didn't like that very much. But there are various things that will start to come through in the next quarter that will start to restore the longer term growth rate of sort of revenues going at 12 to 13% per annum. And what's happened, of course, is music's become ubiquitous now. And the great thing about it being ubiquitous is most of the music's from the back catalogue. So it's not so much new music where you have to pay lots of new stuff to artists and get them up. You're basically, you're basically paying for stuff by and large that's 3 years and more older. 80% plus of the stuff that's played is over 3 years old.
And Bill Ackman's on the register, I believe.
He is. Basically, Tencent Music owned 20%. Bill Ackman owns 10 through Pershing Square. Vivendi held on to 10 themselves. Bolloré own 18 directly, and they've actually bought recently. They bought very aggressively at below 22 euros when the stock fell away on the 25th of July. So it's a bit of a constrained register, and each of those owners love the company. They think it's amazing. If you don't believe my analysis, go read Pershing Square's latest sort of quarterly where Ackman spells it out very clearly there.
And so Bolloré is very much a sum of the parts type valuation thesis. Maybe we'll add it up as we go along. So you mentioned the €6 billion or thereabouts in cash. What's what's the value of their UMG shares worth?
The UMG shares, they've got 335 million of them. They trade at just above 22 euros. So we'll call that 7.5 billion between friends. This is
and as
euros.
we keep going, just remind us what the market cap is of Bolloré.
The market cap of Bolloré, there's two ways to look at it, Chris. They got 2.85 billion shares on issue, trading at about €5.80. But if you get rid of the self-control loop within Bolloré because it controls itself, those shares condense down to about 1.16 billion at €5.80, which basically gives you, a market cap there of about, 7 billion.
And that cross-shareholding structure speaks to about maintaining control more than anything else. Is that why it's been put in place? A bit like the Soul Patts sort of brickworks setup?
Absolutely. It was put in place back when, as you can imagine, as I said, they bought Bolloré back for €1 and then floated it 2 years later. And so it was to basically maintain the control of the Bolloré family. They need that now less and less and less because each of the companies has been buying back shares in each other. And one of the theses for this company is that the whole structure will condense down within the next 2 years. And if it does, then obviously the discount on discount on discount goes away.
And so to keep the numbers simple for myself more than anyone else, put a 7 billion market cap on Bolloré. Is that ballpark around about?
Ballpark. Yeah, that's correct.
We've got just under €6 billion in cash. Yep. And a chunk of UMG shares. In terms of their Vivendi shareholding, what value is that valued at market prices?
At market prices at the current stage, that's about €2.8 billion. But Vivendi's really interesting because Vivendi itself trades at a huge discount to what people think it's really worth. It's trading about €9.50. Most analysts think it's worth €13 plus. And
so maybe before you jump into that, talk us through Vivendi, what they do, how they've operated since the spin out from UMG, and what could cause a re-rate towards those analyst valuations.
What is going to cause a re-rate, Chris, is the fact the company's breaking up into four, and that's been publicly announced. The main assets of Vivendi are Canal Plus. Canal Plus is subscription television in France. They're also making a takeover offer at the moment for one of the largest subscription TV businesses in Africa, which is MultiChoice, based in Johannesburg. That's the TV stations where if you follow rugby in Australia, they've got all the worst rugby commentators in the world on. They rely on sport, basically. The English Premier League and rugby are one of the big things there. They're basically through Anglophone Africa. Canal Plus already control the largest broadcasters in Francophone Africa, in other words, French-speaking Africa. So that's Canal Plus. They They own Havas, which is one of the world's top 6 advertising agencies. They own 10% of Universal Music Group. That was the 10% they kept. And they own a variety of investments, things like Telecom Italia. They own a small stake in Telefonica, and they own a few other businesses in the sort of gaming area as well. And that's a pretty hefty portfolio. When you tally up the sort of UMG and the other businesses they've got, that's about sort of $9 billion worth of investments. And they also control a company I've written about recently called Lagardère. Lagardère is the world's 2nd largest book publisher. They own Hachette, only Bertelsmann are bigger. And Lagardère are the world's largest airport retail business. So when you go to Melbourne Airport and go into the relay shop and pay $5 for a chocolate bar, that's where the money's going. So you can see Vivendi itself is just this great big conglomerate of media and other assets that basically is not truly valued and needs breaking up. So it's going to be broken up into Canal Plus, Havas, a book publishing arm, and then an investment arm, and that's all going to happen starting very late this year into the first quarter of next year.
And do you think Bolloré will end up monetising that, or do you think they'll end up holding smaller parcels of shares in the broken up entities?
I think what they'll do, Chris, is that they'll probably divest some of the broken up bits, most likely Havas, which they don't really need. They will buy more of the book publishing company because they love book publishing. You can see through, for example, News Corp's HarperCollins, which is number 3 in the world. But book publishing is a slow growth industry, but it's a very high return on capital and high cash flow business. So that's why Bolloré likes it. They may buy more Canal Plus, and I think they'll buy much more of the investment arm so that they can set about breaking that up and selling down the stakes. So they're going to be a key part of the monetisation of Vivendi.
And the last business division they own in Rubis, which is less consequential, talk us through what that is and if you think that gets sold off in the next year or two, or if you think they'll try and add to that through acquisitions?
No, I think they're likely to sell it off. The reason Rubis is one of the largest petroleum distributors in France. The reason they know a lot about it is because they are one of the largest petroleum distributors as well through one of the wholly owned Bolloré businesses that we haven't looked at because it's too small. It's basically a stock market play on Rubis. There are other shareholders there, but this is just the 72-year-old Vincent Bolloré showing he's still got it.
And so we've got about 17 billion euro worth of net tangible assets, 35% of which is cash. Like you said, it's a messy opportunity, but it's pretty compelling.
Absolutely. The 16 to 17 billion euros of value that we think is there is about 14 euros 10 per share. And obviously, if there's any appreciation in UMG, which we expect, and Vivendi, which we expect, that'll be added to. You know, you'll be looking at sort of 15, 16 euros. And the key thing here is it's the company that's doing it by condensing the structure, by buying each other's shares back, and then by the spin-offs in Vivendi. It's them creating the value for you and keeping the capital constrained and tight as well. And that's why it's just an absolutely compelling opportunity in our view. And that's why we own Bolloré itself, Compagnie de la Day, which is the largest shareholder in Bolloré. It owns 70%. We own Vivendi. And we also own Lagardère, which we wrote about extensively in our June 2024 quarterly.
It's not a story I'd heard of, but it's a fascinating one. And thanks very much, Andrew, for coming on and sharing it with us.
Thanks for the opportunity, Chris. If people want to read a little bit more about Bolloré and Lagardère, if they go to our website, east72.com.au, and download from the Dynasty Trust tab the June 2023 piece we wrote on Bolloré and the June 2024 piece we wrote on Lagardère.
Thank you, and thanks to the viewers for viewing in. We'll have more Talk Your Book coming up soon.
You're watching Ticker. We'll have more in just a few minutes.